So welcome, and thank you so much for your presence today. We've got a great lineup, more than we could hope for. And I know we're all impatient to hear our distinguished guests, so I'll try and make it short, but there's a few things that we'd like to say. First, a few words about EIES, the European Initiative for Energy Security. So we launched at the end of last year to promote solutions that improve Europe's energy security, competitiveness, and ultimately our collective security. The work we do is based on the belief that to find effective solutions, we need to bring everyone to the table. Energy players, mineral, metal companies, clean tech startups, automakers, the financial sector, defense industry, the military, you name it, and of course, politicians and regulators. So we're happy to see representatives from all of them in the room today. We're supported in our efforts by our growing Energy Security Leadership Council, which is composed of former politicians, military leaders, and current business leaders from all over Europe. Not just in the EU, but also our friends in Norway, the UK, Ukraine, and elsewhere. It's a group of leaders who believe in our mission and are committed to rise above political divides. And we're grateful for their continued support, and we look forward to announcing new joiners very soon in the summer or after the summer. So today's event is obviously part of our efforts to firmly establish ourselves and our priorities on the European stage after a number of recent gatherings here in Brussels and also at the Munich Security Conference. We of course plan to do much more in the next few months, not just here in Brussels, but also across European capitals. Because we preach for Team Europe, and I want to say Team NATO, and for collective solutions for the challenges that we face. But we also understand that when we speak about energy, security, and industrial policy, it is essential to be able to contribute at national level. That's especially true in light of the European elections results, but also of what's happening this week in France, to name just one country. So hard work is needed to convince citizens, but also some politicians, that we are indeed moving in the right direction. What I'll mention now is not news, but it serves to illustrate what we stand for. The pandemic, Russia's aggression of Ukraine, and China's grand strategy and role in feeding this war have reminded us of the reality of the world we live in. Putin's ambitions, of course, are not new, and Beijing's strategy has been in place over 2 decades. But what's clearer today, though, is the extent to which adversaries are ready to team up to target our core values and interests. I believe all of us in this room overall agree on what needs to be done in Europe. We've been moving in that direction for a couple of years already. Increase collective security spending, throw a weight behind Ukraine, secure critical supply chains and infrastructure, deepen economic and financial integration, and design a smart European industrial policy that's neither protectionist nor naive. What's become clear also is that it all starts and ends with secure, affordable, and clean energy. It is obvious that Europe must find its own path. It's also obvious that we're not an island. We need friends and trade and security partners. We won't be able to do it alone, and we must team up with G7 and Global South partners. Also, as challenging as it may sometimes be, the transatlantic partnership remains the most important we have, whether we talk about it from an economic, security, or democratic perspective. The question is, in this myriad of challenges that we face today, how to prioritize. Moving forward with the energy transition in a way that reduces our dependence on autocrats is, of course, a no-brainer, but we will face tough trade-offs on the way. Economic security and industrial policy are now on everyone's lips. De-risking is the leitmotif, in opposition to decoupling. But implementing this is not that easy, and we must define what de-risking means and follow through with a clear roadmap. It's important not just to de-risk, but to strengthen our position. To do so, we must develop the strategic supply chains and technologies that will give us an edge, from minerals and metals to batteries, renewables, nuclear, others, including dual-use technologies in Europe, but also in partner countries. The EU and NATO have already taken considerable steps over recent years. Both sides are collaborating more than ever, but still, both are a collection of member states, and the next step is for these nations to support and implement new strategies. On that front, we also hope that the Hungarian presidency can drive consensus on some of our core issues. That is the most important and most challenging bit. But our collective reaction to the events of the past 5 years demonstrated our solidarity and our capacity to react and take initiative. We now understand the security imperative of investing in our energy autonomy and industrial base. And we can and we will catch up if we can show a clear path that delivers economic and security benefits for all Europeans. So like many of us, of course, impatiently waiting for Mr. Draghi's recommendations, but also for the outcome of the Washington summit. I want to highlight that to move forward, we'll need not just political, but also industrial leadership. In addition, of course, to popular support. We're stronger together, within Europe and with our global allies. And on this note, I'll give the floor to EVP Šefčovič, who's been very hard at work, like many of our guests today, dealing with some of Europe's toughest issues for many years. So Mr. Šefčovič kindly agreed to join us today to speak about what's been achieved and what's coming next for Europe, and to frame a discussion for our two panels. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your continued support. I'll invite you to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Albéric, for that kind introduction and also for gathering us in this beautiful venue. And I see that your discussions this afternoon would be indeed extremely informative and I'm sure very enriching, because I see that some of my colleagues in the audience, Madam Anna Aximakopoulos, she did a lot for critical raw materials together with Peter Hanley, who was spearheading the efforts when we started to take the critical raw materials seriously, and Kerstin Jorna, who is Director General for a very important DG. It's called DG Grow, and we need to grow our economy, so she has it in her hands. So I'm sure that they will bring a lot of very important insights into your discussion. And I think, Albéric, you promised me you will not steal the thunder of my speech, but you a little bit did, because you brought all the right topics into the perspective. Indeed, the importance of transatlantic cooperation and the fact that we have to pay much more focus not only on demand and supply questions, but indeed on the security approach as such, and also on all the reports which we will be, I'm sure, inspired when the next Commission will be drafting their plans for the future. We had very inspiring report of Italian Prime Minister Letta. I know that another brilliant Italian Prime Minister Draghi is finalizing his report, which will be presented to us shortly. And then I think for all of us, what is a must reading is the reading of the strategic agenda of the European heads of states and government, which was approved just last week. And I think that if you compare the document with the document which was adopted 5 years ago, you would see a big difference. Big difference, which is actually reflecting the situation we are right now in. That it's underlying the fact that Europe and Europeans went through a lot. We went through the global pandemic. We have seen the horrors of the war returning to our continent, and I dare to say there is no other major economy which is affected more negatively than the European one. And we had to brace the challenge to navigate through this difficult period and at the same time deal with the great societal challenges of our time, such as green and digital transition, challenges of the hybrid threats to our democracy, or simply learn how to live in this digital, all-time being connected approach and the democratic systems of governing. So the topic of the security of energy is absolutely correct one, but I think it falls under even wider topic, which I'm sure would be a good idea to discuss at your future discussion, and this is the security of economy as such. This afternoon I was having the roundtable discussion with the green hydrogen providers, and one of the gentlemen there made a very nice argument. He said that we cannot risk that we would replace our dependence on energy by the dependence on technology. And that, I think, would be the challenge for the European Commission and for our companies in the future. But let's focus on the energy issues for the sake of this afternoon discussion. We've been faced with several challenges over the last 5 years. First one was how to decarbonize our energy systems, and at the same time, how to make sure that we would strengthen our energy security, especially at the time which followed after the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine. We could really felt the first hand what does it mean if the energy is fully weaponized. How much does it cost? What kind of anxiety it brings to the society? What impact it has on the inflation? How it affects the public mood? And all that started when we clearly saw that energy as a good is not the typical free-flowing merchandise, but it could be really weaponized and manipulated in such a way as we have seen, especially in the first months after the invasion of Ukraine. And also it has a cost, because if you look how much we spent on making sure the lights are on, economy is functioning, and we have social peace in Europe. We spent in 1 year 1 trillion euros on making this happen. 600 billion for this exorbitant prices for the commodity, which was the gas and oil, and 400 billion for the subsidies of our households and companies so they could make it through these very, very difficult times. So we know the dependencies are very, very expensive, and we have to learn the lesson from this very difficult moment. And therefore, if it comes to the energy, what we've been focusing on is to make sure that we would survive the crisis, but at the same time put in place all the systems which we could to make sure that we will have in the future reliable and affordable supplies of energy for European households and businesses. We did our utmost to reduce the dependence on external suppliers. We've been focusing on how can we diversify the portfolio of those who are supplying us with energy, and we also been focusing on building the energy system which is more resilient to shocks. And having done all that, we never kind of lost our focus from the goal, which is, despite sometimes very difficult discussion about tackling the climate challenge in Europe, which was never put under the doubt in any exchange of views I had with the citizens, NGOs, or industry, to make sure that we want to be climate neutral by 2050, that we want to live in a healthy environment, and we want to tackle the very dangerous biodiversity loss. So what we've been doing, I mean, we introduced the Next Generation EU, which was giving additional financial firepower, kind of new budgetary instrument to the European Union. Big part of it, we focused on so-called Repower EU plan, which had the goal to accelerate the energy transition. We've been setting very ambitious targets for energy efficiency and renewables. And we've been introducing much more flexibility into our electricity system. We adopted our quite difficult negotiations with our member states and European Parliament, new electricity market design, which will strengthen the role of flexibility services, demand response, and energy storage. We wanted simply to give the energy providers the possibility of long-term contracts on making sure that the system which is placed is kind of working within the bandwidth which would provide them with a certain flexibility, but also a certain frame within which they can operate safely. And we believe that this combination would deliver what I think must be priority for every government, for every commissioner in the next European Commission. And this is not to make sure that we would have the supplies of energy we need, but that we will be constantly focusing on making sure that energy prices in Europe would be lower, because it's one of the key prerequisites to make sure that our economy would be competitive with other competitors, where energy could be 3 to 5 times cheaper, depending if you're talking about electricity or gas. We've been, of course, working also in the new ways by which we wanted to use better Europe's weight and also the political influence in the world. I was tasked by the President of the Commission to introduce the first ever joint purchase of gas. We set up the system, which is actually quite simple, which worked very well. We've been working with all the companies interested to import the gas. We've been aggregated demand through specialized digital platform for all of them, and we've been approaching the global bidders, global markets with this proposal and ask them for their bids to supply gas to the European consumers. And it worked remarkably well. We managed almost by 80 to 90% replace the Russian supplies, and we coupled this effort also with very strong bilateral contacts, be it with the United States of America, where we early on signed political framework agreement between our President of the Commission and US President Biden on this first 50 billion cubic meters of supply, but also with Norway and other key suppliers, just to make sure that we would have enough of this important transitional fuel which we need to rebalance our growing share of renewables, which are cheaper, are cleaner, but at the same time they are intermittent. Thanks to this effort, I can say that today we have extremely clean energy mix. I think that it was published yesterday by the agencies like Reuters and Bloomberg that in the first half of this year we managed to generate more than 50% of our electricity by renewable sources. An additional 24-25% was generated by the nuclear power. So 75% of electricity generation in Europe is now achieved through low carbon sources, and that's the way to go. And that's, I think, the way which we clearly would need also for the future. What is the hindrance here, and what we need to do better in the future? More renewables we will have in the system, better smart grids we would need in Europe. So we need to develop the fleet of renewables in parallel with upgraded the smart grids across Europe. We need it to be able to transmit already in 25 years, when we want to be climate neutral, 3 times more electricity than today. We want to use these new grids to charge the batteries of our EVs. We want to use electricity for heating and cooling our houses, and we want to electrify also the sectors of the industry which are traditionally extremely energy intensive, like steel making or aluminium melting. For that you need a lot of electricity, but also you need a strong cables, strong substations, smart grids which would be fully digitized and which would be able to carry the load of the electricity. And that, I think, would be also a challenge for the future. And when we are talking about the smart grids, we're talking about energy security, because you don't need only the capacity. You need the digitization, you need the data security, you need to have backup plans, and you really need to do it in a way that it could withstand all kinds of hybrid threats we've been seeing on dramatic increase over the last couple of years. And I would say this goes very well along with our steps we have undertaken on the industrial sides. And it was the great work of Kerstin and her team to develop the Green Deal industrial plan. We've been putting on the table European Chips Act, or we've been working together with several DGs on batteries regulation to make sure that we would remain a superpower when it comes to the green technologies. And here the lessons learned is what I hear from all the business leaders. We have to focus very clearly on level playing fields, on the fair trade practices, because we cannot invest only innovation and forget about scale up. We cannot keep our market being very open, very legal based, when we see that our companies do not have the same welcome, same conditions when they want to export to other markets. We've been working a lot on critical raw materials. We adopted Critical Raw Materials Act, which entered into force a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very proud that on that same day when this act entered into the force, we had the first session of the steering board, and we immediately issued a call for the proposals where we would like to see by the end of the year not only the list of viable projects, which would get the seal of the strategic European projects, but we also would like to have them evaluated and start the work for the new call for proposals, because this would be, I would say, from now on, permanent feature of the work of the European Union to focus on the critical raw materials. Where can we get them? Do we have enough projects to develop in Europe? Do we have enough of processing capacities in Europe? Can we diversify the supply of critical raw materials from the countries with whom we would have a very solid framework agreements, MOU signed, and therefore we increased our critical raw materials diplomacy, because now we have more than a dozen of this MOU signed with I would say all principled countries which are important for critical raw material supply. And we're also creating funding, be it on national level, where I really would like to comment Italy, France, Germany are setting up the funds to fund this type of the project, but also our European accelerator in energy, which is setting up the fund of 500 million euros to go for high-risk projects. And I would like to thank Nadia Calvino, new president of the EIB, for making sure that this is one of the priorities for the EIB, because we need them to leverage, we need them to multiply, we need them to secure, and we need them to de-risk these projects. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult. I think with what I just mentioned, it's quite clear that we have to focus on one very important element when we are talking about the green transition. And that is that we absolutely cannot afford to outsource this transition to anyone else. The green transition must be based on the technologies which are made in Europe, where we would not create any dependencies and where we would simply strengthen the sector, the technological base, and also the companies which will be strong in this segment. I know that we have in our audience also a lot of our American friends, and therefore I would just repeat the idea, which I am a very strong advocate of, and I believe that we have to put much more energy and effort into creation of what I would describe as transatlantic clean tech marketplace. What I mean is to have something narrower, if you cannot go for the big free trade agreement. Sector-wise, let's work on standards, let's work on mutual investment sources, let's scale up together on the two biggest economies in the world, because our industry, our citizens would benefit, but especially we would be ready to share this technology also with the developing world, and we would make great service to the tackling of the climate change, because this technology would be a state-of-the-art, and it could be offered to the developing countries to help them to jump over that fossil phase through which we are still going through, and which we started probably 200 years ago. To achieve all this, I think it's absolutely crucial to have much closer interaction with our citizens, to really debunk some of the myth links with the green transition, but also with our industry. And therefore, we started with the so-called clean transition dialogues, where we focused very much on the industries which are most affected by the green transition. Is it steel industry? Is it energy industry? Are we talking about the mobility industry? Simply to hear from them how they see our policies, what needs to be changed, and where we need to adjust our policies. And I have to say that it brought a lot of valuable input, and I think, be it in Antwerpen Declaration or in Strategic Agenda, you will see the reflection of this fruit of the discussion, and I think that it would be clearly very important to continue in the future. We are working very closely, and I would say also in unprecedented close manner, with NATO. I think that we had the first ever official visit of the Secretary General to the College of Commissioners, where we had very good discussions and compared the notes, what we can do together, how we can protect our lines of communication, our critical infrastructure, and it's clearly something which we have to do together, because it has a crucial importance for the performance of our economy. And we also are setting up, I believe, new standards how to work with the developing countries. We simply want to offer different model under the global takeaway, meaning we just do not want to dig the hole, take your critical raw materials, leave them as, take the product, and leave you sometimes by quite big financial debt behind. We want to work with our partners, develop the projects, create as much value added as possible in the territory, create new jobs, create new partnerships, and share the benefits of the mutual projects. And I was participating in the first Global Gateway Summit. I think it was actually in this hotel as well, like half a year ago. The response was very positive. We have a lot of very, very encouraging projects, and I think that that would be the way how we can start our new kind of outreach to the developing world, and to work with them to modernize the country, to tackle the climate change, and to forge new quality partnership on political and business level. So to conclude, I would say that what is ahead of us is enormous challenge, but at the same time enormous opportunity. And I think that your work, your expertise in making sure that our energy would be secure, would be affordable, would be clean, would be absolute precondition for our joint success. Thank you very much.
See, there's a reason why I wanted to speak before you, not after. I have to manage people's expectations. So, I mean, you've said it all and you've said it best, so I'm not going to paraphrase you. But good luck for the road ahead, and we'll try to be as helpful as we can on the way. Now I'll invite you to welcome our first panel on building diverse and secure global supply chains, which will be moderated by Brian Bill from Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, who's an expert on the mineral and battery value chains, and who will introduce the other experts on the panel. Brian, please. And I'll invite the other speakers to join the panel also, if you can. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today at the EIES event on supply chain security in Brussels. I have the privilege of moderating a panel that will delve into how the European Union and the industry can collaborate to enhance Europe's competitiveness and supply chain resilience. We will explore the practical implications of the EU Green Deal in a world marked by trade barriers and geopolitical competition for minerals, which are much needed to scale up defense and clean tech applications. This esteemed panel will discuss which or what is needed in terms of policy measures to increase the EU's competitiveness and supply chain resilience. So a lot of buzzwords already in the introductions, like industrial policy, competitiveness, and so forth. So I would like to introduce you to our panelists from my left to right. So we are very honored to have Thomas Lagré, who is a partner at Infravia, a Paris-based private equity firm tasked with setting up a critical minerals fund in France through a critical minerals investment strategy with the backing of the French government. Thomas brings 70 years of finance experience in the metals and mining industry and has worked in several countries in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And followed by Laurence Duchamp-Benoit, who is currently the global head of government affairs at Rio Tinto, one of the biggest mining companies in the world. Laurence is responsible for shaping Rio Tinto's public policy advocacy, its partnerships with host countries, and the global and external affairs strategy for the company. And before joining Rio Tinto, Laurence worked in the private sector and at the United Nations. Then we are very honored to have Kerstin Jorna, the Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, also called DG GROW at the European Commission. With a career spanning over 30 years at the Commission, Kerstin brings a wealth of experience shaping internal market policies and having worked closely with various European commissioners. And last but not least, Olaf Skalmeras, who is currently the CEO Managing Director of Norge Mineralen, part of Norge Mining, a Norwegian company with the ambition to become a global leader in the extraction and processing of critical minerals like vanadium and phosphate, which are needed to make new battery technologies like LFP, sodium ion, and so forth. So in terms of format, we have approximately 45 minutes left for the panel discussions and another 10 minutes for some questions for the audience. So in the meantime, I encourage to the audience to think about some issues and questions you would like to address to our esteemed panel. To continue, Kerstin, let me start with you. As already mentioned by the European Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič, with the EU Green Industrial Plan entering into a new phase and with the recent entry into force of the European Critical Raw Materials Act and the Net Zero Industry Act, could you perhaps outline in terms of implementation what the next steps are in the coming months?
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Maroš Šefčovič told you what we are doing, and now we're walking the talk, actually. And Net Zero Industry Act entered into force this weekend, and Critical Raw Materials Act a couple of weeks ago. You have to see three texts together. Repower EU, which said, after the shock that the Vice President described, 150 BCM of Russian gas no longer available. That shock, we said, Repower EU, we have to deploy massively windmills, solar panels, renewable energy. But then was the next thing, yes, but in order to do this and not create a new dependency, we need to produce them, at least a critical mass of them. And that's Net Zero Industry Act, which facilitates a production of clean technologies in Europe. And there's an aspirational target, the Magic 40, which says that 40% of that equipment should be produced in Europe. And I say that to the investors also in the room. We mean what we say. But in order to do that, wind turbines, batteries, solar panels, we also need critical raw materials. And that's where the Critical Raw Material Act comes in, because it's about making sure that we have the materials that we need to do to build these clean tech equipment that we need to deploy under Repower. So that's how it hangs together. Now, when we looked at the situation, we said we cannot make the normal single market legislation that we normally do, remove the barriers, ask member states to implement it, and take a long time. What we needed was something that unlocked the scale and speed of the single market so fast. So you will see that Net Zero Industry Act and Critical Raw Materials Act in particular, they are built on the business case, your business case. And any business case, when you want to produce, is access to land. The permitting saga is access to finance. I'll say a word about that. Access to skills, access to market. And you will find these 4 pillars reflected in the 2 texts. The permitting saga, for many years we've done single market legislation, fine, but we left the implementation to the member states. And that meant 27 different regimes. And in the clean tech areas, we did some research. You know, it could take years until you knew whether your project was actually being approved or not. And it was a big black box once you asked. And you could find yourself at the end of many years with the authorities saying, oh, by the way, we forgot, you should have given us this document. And then you start from anew. On the mining, on the critical raw materials, whether it's extraction or refining or recycling for that matter, it could take decades. So that's what we had to cut through. And we did. You will find very stringent, pretty similar permitting procedures that apply in the whole of the single market. Wherever you have your project, same procedure, identical procedure. One-stop shop, fully digital, stop the clock, so no more documents at the end, and clear deadlines. We tried to say, if you hear nothing by the deadline, it's approved. Unfortunately, we did not get that in the legislative process, but I haven't given up hope. But still, from an investor point of view, or as a project owner, you know, after 12 months, 18 months, okay, it's no. But then you move on and you do something else useful with the money. So that's the permitting part. Then access to finance. In the area of clean tech in particular, you know, this is a transformation. That means innovation. And innovation has 2 main risks. One is that actually going to work? That's performance risk. And the other risk is anybody actually going to buy that thing, that new thing? So that's why investors hesitate. And that's why we need the public to de-risk a bit. And that's why strategic projects, we have this channel for strategic projects, and on critical raw materials, the call is already ongoing. You can still participate. Cutoff is on the 22nd of August. And on Net Zero Industry Act, we're starting now. So, because that only entered into effect this weekend. So, strategic projects will benefit from a signaling effect and have super rapid access to public de-risking funds, which will not be enough for the project, obviously, but we hope that this signaling effect actually will also mean that you can get private investment coming into it. And then there's the skills conundrum. Only in batteries, we're looking for 800,000 qualified people to actually build batteries in Europe, and they will not fall from the sky. So we are developing a new concept in the single market, which is the skills academies. In the past, we recognized diploma, and that took a long time. And of course, there is no diploma for being a solateur, that is the guy that establishes a solar panel and electricity on your roof. So rather than talk about diploma, we now talk about skills, portable skills, wherever you are in Europe. So we have the Battery Academy that has already upskilled 67,000 people. It's not 800,000, but we're, you know, it's a start. And just 2 weeks ago at Intersolar in Munich, we launched the Solar Academy. It's a new way to train the people. It's private and public money coming in, and it's curricula that are being developed by industry, trade unions together, so to know where to go and make it attractive. And then the last one is access to market, which is really important because, you know, somebody needs to buy the green steel. Somebody needs to buy also, and to be able to buy the clean tech and not feel tempted to buy the cheap stuff that comes from somewhere else. So that's why we developed in the Critical Raw Materials Act an obligation for the bigger companies to actually look at the risk in their supply chains and to de-risk them as of a certain dependency. So it's to better understand. Net Zero Industry Act, we went even further. We said that public procurement, auctions, public subsidy schemes, they should contain non-price criteria, qualitative criteria, like cybersecurity, like environmental, like social, like resilience. You know, will I still get my spare part? Will that create a dependency? And so we leverage the public markets to have a lead market signaling function. And some member states are already starting now, because in the wind sector and the solar sector, we actually have member states committed in the charters, we have 2 charters, to advance these criteria and to move in front of actually the implementation of the rules. So if you retain one thing, the glass is full, half full, and we walk the talk.
Thank you. Over to you, Lawrence, from an industry and I guess a more global perspective, given Rio Tinto's global corporate footprint with operations in various jurisdictions. Yeah, what is your assessment of Europe's, European Union's industrial policy, particularly the Critical Raw Materials Act, within a more global context? Thank you.
Well, look, thank you very much. Look, first of all, I must say what Europe has done is extraordinary. And we have been supporters and proponents of the Critical Raw Materials Act. And I think it opens up opportunities for a company like ours to start looking at Europe as a place where we can expand our business. So that's the first thing I want to say. Looking at it from a global competitive lens, there's still some way to go. I mean, there's one thing is what happens here in Brussels, the other is what happens actually in member states. And what I've seen in the interaction that we've had with member states, the approach of member states in the way they approach securitizing critical raw materials is very uneven. Some member states are very clear about what they want. They have a dialogue with us. They bring along industry. Other member states are far more sketchy in what they're actually looking for. So I think there's a bit of work to be done at the member state level in order to ensure that some of these materials that we produced are secured and sold into European markets. So that's the second thing that I'd like to say. Thirdly, from a global perspective, I mean, it's really hard to compete with the kind of packages that we get in the US and in Canada, to be honest. If I look at and granted, the contexts are very different. We don't have a very large operational footprint here in Europe, even though we'd like to do more. But we do have quite a large footprint in Canada where, you know, we contribute around $10 billion to the Canadian economy. We employ around 50,000 people. So the incentive of government to support us is very, very different. So I just want to put that caveat. But having said that, we are with governments that co-invest with us. So they come and co-invest into our projects. We've done that with a critical mineral called scandium, which is important for the Canadian defense industry. And they came to us and co-invested in our research around scandium, helped us develop the pilot plant. We've also benefited from nearly $4 billion in subsidies and co-investments, if I take the whole envelope, from the Canadian government to green our mines, to develop new mines, to make sure that we create green supply chains in Canada, supply chains for critical minerals, and to give them a comparative advantage. So in that context, there is a gap that still needs to be filled in Europe, but what Europe has done is a good start. On the other side, the IRA we have found is far more complex to navigate. It's the process and the procedures to access IRA funds are really very arcane. So we've had to put in, I mean, I have a team in DC that just specifically is focused on that. But again, the approach from members of Congress and the approach from the administration, various parts of the administration, in particular the DOD, to our business is very, very precise, I would say. They come to us, they want to understand what kind of minerals do we have, what do we have in our tailings, out of the critical raw materials that they have on their securities list or on their critical raw materials list. They want to understand how we can source those minerals from our mine, what are the help that we need, what type of help do we need in terms of new technologies, in terms of permitting, etc. So there's a real meeting of minds between both the supply side and the demand side. And I think that's a gap that's still missing in Europe. The last piece that I want to touch on is the processing. I mean, one thing is to secure minerals, but it's no good to secure minerals when they still have to go to the other side of the world to be processed in Asia and then come back into European supply chains, either as a finished product or as a product that allows you to finish a product in Europe. That's not real security of supply. So there's a lot to be done in terms of creating an environment that not just thinks about the raw material, but also thinks about that critical part, which is the middle side of the equation, which is processing. And we have been very vocal about this. I mean, we have a European CEO. Our CEO is Danish, and one of the things that he's been very vocal about in public platforms is the need to reindustrialize Europe. So we have to look at that also and see what we can do, and we're ready to play our part in that. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence, for your valuable insights. Turning to you, Olaf, from an industry perspective, and in your case, a Nordic perspective. Yeah, what is your assessment of Europe's industrial policy, Critical Raw Materials Act, but especially in terms of competitiveness in the current global competitive context? And when it comes to supply diversification, what role could Norway play in that regard, in your company specifically?
Thank you, Brian. Norway has a huge potential to supply critical and strategic raw material. Norway has been sleeping on this part of the business in light of the expansion in the oil and gas industry. Now we see that oil and gas is going down in activity, new activities. And we see a revitalization of the mining industry in Norway. And I would like to make an example. We, as you introduced me, we will produce phosphate and derivative phosphorus and vanadium, which is important for the green shift. We have identified a resource in southwest of Norway, and a resource estimate there is 4.5 billion tons of mineralized ore. We will take out 20 million a year. So that means that we have 225 years operations from one deposit. There are a lot of deposits in Norway which are there to deliver. So Norway has a role to play in securing Europe critical raw material. In addition, I think we need to see a certificate of the footprint of the raw material. We will be delivering carbon neutral critical raw material. Are we able to do that? Well, luckily, Norway is fueled, electricity system is fueled by hydropower. So we get a benefit there. And we will electrify fully the operations in the mining. We will, in the refining part of phosphate to phosphorus, we will use CCS technology to remove the carbon. Technology is there. There are a lot of CO2 storage being developed in the North Sea. So things are available for us. That means that we can bring forward critical raw material for the energy transition, which has zero carbon footprint from the beginning. So we started in 2018. We have drilled around 85 kilometers with core, so we know exact what we have underneath us. We plan to start to take a final investment decision early 2026 and start operation in 2028, 10 years after we first started. We are on a good track. However, we need collaboration with the authorities in Norway in order to fast-track the permits and the zoning processes. Last year, the Norwegian government introduced a mineral strategy where fast-track was one element. The other elements we have control over. We can control them and deliver on them. Circularity, sustainability and all that. But the fast track has now been there for a year without being filled with content. So we are desperate discussions with the ministry to try to fill it with the content. Then there is a green industry policy being launched in Norway, where mineral extraction is part of. We lack to see the speed of concretization of what that means. Moving to EU, I'm humbled, Kirsten, to listen to you and to see what you have made in such a short time. And there are softer measures you mentioned. There are more tangible measures, and the one is this strategic project initiative. But I like to see what's at the end of that on the financing, access to finance, which I think is very important if we are going to move forward quickly. Access to finance. And in general, I would say that we should have more readily accessible financing, also in the early phase, not when we are at the finishing line. Then a lot of things can be passed, but we need it early. Then I think the strategic projects take starting point is strategic raw material. I think there could be also a strategic project to deliver a strategic purpose of this, and then meaning that it should also include critical raw materials, not only taking starting points from strategic raw materials. And lastly, I think, which I feel doesn't come straight through, is that when we are delivering carbon neutral minerals, what is the benefit for us? Yes, we will have CBAM, but CBAM has also its deficits. We will deliver more than total import of phosphorus in Europe today, which is mainly from Kazakhstan. We are trained through Moscow and Belarus to Europe. We will deliver more, but clean. What comes with the imported phosphorus is 13 tons of CO2 per ton phosphorus. So how are we compensated? How are we incentivized early to actually deliver zero carbon material. That's also a part which I see is lacking from the regulatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf. And finally, Thomas, first question for you to kick off. From a financial perspective, could you perhaps shed some light on the aim of setting up the Critical Minerals Fund in France, and how this could support not only France, but also the EU supply chain resilience strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And so just to set the scene on who we are and what we do. So in Infravia, we are a private equity management fund in Paris with a strong DNA in the European infrastructure, and we have been selected a bit more than a year ago by the French government to launch a new strategy on the critical metals value chain. I'm lucky to be with you today because my ministers are a bit busy this week, so they were supposed to tell you a bit more about all the tools they have in their toolbox. So we are one of their tools. And the interesting thing is that we have actually co-designed and co-defined the strategy that is then awarded to Infravia with the French government. That is to invest into the whole value chain. So we will invest into minority equity stakes in mining, processing, refining, recycling project or companies all across the critical raw materials of the CRM Act. So that's a lot of them. With a global scope, so that's important. We are not only a French domestic fund, it's a global approach. And the condition that is defined or that comes with it is to demonstrate a benefit that can be direct or indirect toward the French and more broadly the European industrial ecosystem. So that's a long sentence to explain the strategic nature of that initiative. We had a debate with the French government as to whether that should be done with a public model or a private model. You have obviously the Japanese model with the JOCMEC, or the model in Finland with FMG. The decision was made to go that route, awarding the mandate to a private firm. And the reason of that is actually by putting a dedicated private governance with no veto rights or no involvement of the political agenda in the decision-making process, then you're able to attract private capital. So that's the whole model that has been discussed with the French government and awarded to Infravia Capital, as I said, a bit more than a year ago. So it's a pure equity fund, 25 years money, which is quite important compared to the needs of the industry and the cyclicality of the industry as well. When dealing with critical metals, obviously you have a revenue that is quite volatile. So for private investors, you need enough runway to play with the cycles and not being able or forced to sell at the bottom of the cycles. That's one. Second of all, with 25 years investment horizon, you can align with the industrialists themselves when developing their project and their refining or recycling projects. And it's also a good asset class when private investors have liabilities and they want to match these with assets on the balance sheets. So that's the model that we have defined. It's pretty efficient. We feel we have kind of the best of both worlds because on top of that, we have the French government seeding the fund by putting 500 million out of the total of 2 billion euro. So they will sit alongside the other investors, pari passu, with, as I said, no additional veto rights whatsoever, but they will still provide the comfort and the political umbrella, if you wish, alongside the private capital investors. The private investors will come from pure financial investors, pension funds, insurance companies, banks, family offices, whatever. We also have good support and good traction with other governments, and that's the beauty of that private nature of the fund, is that you can attract then money coming from other countries that are willing to share the same objectives. And the third piece is really attracting capital from the industry themselves, the end users, all the corporates that are active all along the value chain. Not necessarily the mining companies, but certainly the end users, the car manufacturers, the energy companies. I mean, you saw that some of them have been investing directly into mines with their own expertise, their own due diligence. So the idea is just to join forces. Formally, we are putting the team in place at the moment. We are raising the funds beyond the 500 million that is coming from the French government. And we're also prioritizing the opportunities with that global approach on all the critical raw materials and that very comprehensive value chain approach. And what's interesting is that out of the 300 opportunities that we have on the list, it really confirms the strategy in terms of being broad, being global, and being all over the critical raw materials. Just to put numbers in perspective, with the 2 billion euro target of the fund, our objective is to invest across 15, 20 projects or companies, minority equity stakes, being alongside the management team to provide value over the long term. So we'll be looking for board seats or governance rights. But very importantly, we'll be looking for partnerships. So we don't intend to run the mines or to operate the plants ourselves. Obviously, we're providing the capital. Our minimum investment ticket will be 50 million euro, 50. So it gives you quite decent amount of capital to deploy. And we'd be very keen on looking at the expansion of the platforms when investing into a mine, then funding the expansion, or when investing into a processing plant, then trying to make sure we have the feed and supply coming from the mine themselves. So there is a long-term industrialist platform approach to the strategy. So we just one of the first fund being launched in Europe. Obviously, you heard that Germany is launching their own fund as well, Italy as well. We often have the question on competition. I mean, 2 billion euro, that's not much compared to the needs, right? So if there are other opportunities around, we welcome them. It will not only provide additional capital to the industry, but also raise probably the awareness of this sector as an asset class for the private capital investors.
Thank you, Thomas. Now I would like to delve into a couple of issues that have been touched upon. The first one is, how to tackle, I mean, Olaf has briefly referred to is how to tackle locally and incentivize locally sustainable and responsible sourcing and manufacturing in Europe, as well as the need to create a level playing field at a global scale to address the increasing low cost and carbon intensive supply. Incentivizing locally sustainable and responsible local sourcing and manufacturing could arguably be a way for the European Union to offer something different and a way to bolster its competitiveness around the world. I think an excellent example is how the EU is doing it right now is through the implementation of the EU battery regulation. Kirsten, I would like to start with you again, since you have spoken at previous events in Brussels about green nickel and green steel and the need to create a green market to address, for instance, the sustainable nickel supply from Indonesia, a market that Benchmark knows quite well. Could you perhaps elaborate on this and tell the audience what is needed to address this and to incentivize this?
Thank you. There were actually two questions. One was, what was in it for me to produce carbon-free? So where's the offtake? It's the market question. And the other was, where's my money? Now, if I may just say a word about the money, that's the wrong question to frame the question in Europe. Because what we do is we look at the risk. So we want to know the risk, and you've started talking about it. If this is what the market takes, and this is what you don't get, then you don't have a project. So where we want to look in, and that's behind the French initiative, the German, but also our own financing, is that we take the risk that's missing. But we need the other skin in the game as well. So don't think in terms of, this is the money I want. Think in terms of, this is the risk I want. I need someone to cover, to de-risk. I know it's not the approach in the US. There you get $3 per kilo of hydrogen. But, how do you get it to the factory gate? How do you find an off-taker? That's the problem. The way we do it is by actually contracts for difference, trying to bridge the gap. Now, why would you be, producing green steel anyhow? And you asked for the green nickel, which I have with me, my conference prop, the green nickel. Today, what we see is that there is a lot of nickel coming via Indonesia, too much for actually what the market takes, and it destroys all the prices. It's not a business case to invest in mining or refining, for that matter, of nickel. By the way, refining is also in the Critical Raw Materials Act, so it's covered like recycling. And because people don't invest, it's not a business case, price volatility, prices, going down 50, 60%, we will end up with nickel only coming from one source. And that's what we cannot afford. And that's where our premium market idea on nickel starts. We have 300,000 tons of nickel use in Europe, mainly for stainless steel, mainly for batteries, but also for certain defense applications. So if we used that demand side as a leverage, and we created an incentive for that demand side to use green nickel rather than any other nickel, because it's kind of a critical situation in defense if you don't get that nickel anymore, or if we couldn't produce these batteries anymore. And if you look, for example, at a wind tower, that's 1,000 tons of steel, and 6% of that is nickel because of stainless. That wind turbine creates renewable energy that goes into an electrolyzer, produces hydrogen, that decarbonizes steel production, green steel, and that goes back into the wind tower. This is the story we need to build in Europe, and it's a story of resilience. This nickel story is actually now being looked at, processed, even in the cellars, I would say, of the G7. I mean, it's starting as one idea to stabilize market and to separate the green market from the other market, the green nickel market from the nickel market, in order to stabilize investment and guarantee supply also for the future. And if you take the demand, our 300,000 tons and the US and Japan, for example, and we were talking about quite a lot of demand side. And the demand side, long-term purchase agreement, is in fact your OPEX when you produce. So that's how we want to promote these premium markets.
Thank you. Lawrence, Olaf, from a mining perspective, any comments on this, please?
Sorry.
Any comments on this, how to incentivize locally and responsible sourcing in Europe, and how to address and create a level playing field at a global scale?
Absolutely. I think you've said it all. The incentive for us is to have a differentiated market where you get a premium for a green product. And that's the way that we've always looked at it. Otherwise, we're essentially dragged to the bottom, and then we find ourselves in a competitive space that is uneven.
Yeah, I'm not fancy the green premium, but I'm on the other side. We have a standard. There is a certain carbon footprint we accept, and if you don't deliver it, it will be some costs attached to it. And Kirsten, I'm very happy that you showed this bottle with this amount of, and not this one with this, because it is substantial. It is actually substantial. So I think we definitely need to go into a public-private relationship on how we should structure it. Contract for differences is one way. There might also be other ways, which is more efficient. But I think we need to go into a really good dialogue to actually structure this and get the right incentives.
Thank you. The following issue that I would like to tackle is supply diversification and what challenges and opportunities we are facing as policymakers and industry. So despite the EU's aim for supply localization, it's crystal clear, I think, that the EU will need to rely on third countries' supply through strategic partnerships and industrial partnership in the clean tech space with global partners to reach its supply diversification targets in 2035. Sorry. To de-risk from China. It will also need to rely on the private sector, and the industry's role will be key in that regard. Therefore, I would like to address this first with you, Olaf and Lawrence. you touch upon it briefly, the public-private partnership angle. But how can this be forged, for instance, in the context of the strategic CRM partnerships? And how do we incentivize the offtake part of this, which is one of the goals of the strategic projects?
Okay. I think when we have been through a disintegration of value chains, now we are trying to integrate them. And we start from scratch. So there is a lot of infrastructure investment we need to do. Not a lot of production facilities we need to establish. And we cannot make those decisions without a long-term commitment underpinning them. So we need, from our side, in order to invest, we need long-term offtake commitments, either by companies or guarantees from government. That's the only way we can manage to build up a supply chain for Europe.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of partnerships and diversification, I mean, the first thing is, if Europe is to meet its goal in terms of the green transition and also secure a set of minerals, not all of those minerals are going to come from Europe. That's very clear when you look at the demand that is projected for a number of minerals. And that will require partnerships with third countries and securing resources coming from third countries. Now, what I have seen, and I've said this quite a few times, is in my interaction with policymakers, it starts with the country. I've said that to the MSP very clearly on a number of occasions. It's, well, we've identified a number of friendly countries and we need to go and do partnerships with them in order to secure the resources that they have. Industry, we start with the geology. Mining is about geology. So first you need to understand, where is the resource? Is that resource there in sufficient quantities, long life? What type of resource do you have? Is this a bankable project, etc., etc.? So there's a little bit of a shift that needs to happen in terms of shifting the paradigm of thinking of these partnerships first through the lens of friendly countries rather than through the lens of geology. That's the first thing. Second is the nature of mining in the rest of the world has changed dramatically. Mining partnerships has changed dramatically in the past 10 years. What we find now is we can no longer go into a country and just establish a mine and mine on our own. It doesn't work like that anymore. Countries are asking for equity. They're asking for part of the supply chain to be in those countries. They want to produce. They want to produce the not just the raw material, but also to move up the value chain. So within that context, what we've seen, and one of the countries that's been really smart in Europe around this is Germany. What we've seen is the German government has come to us and said, why don't we go as a package? We will come with you because you have the mining and the geological knowledge. We will bring some funding, so KfW, the fund that they've established, in order to de-risk. And you know, when we're talking about mining projects, we also need to think about what amounts of money are we talking about. Large-scale mining, it's billions and billions, multiples of billions of dollars. So really, when a fund is putting 50 million, we probably burn that in half a month in a large mining project. So the funding, however, is interesting for us from a point of view of de-risking the funding, putting a little bit of skin in the game for the country that comes along. The third piece that the Germans always bring is off-takers. And they come with their industry. They say, well, here's our industry, and we have a number of industrial players here that are interested in being off-takers. How can we do this together? So we're doing that in Chile at the moment with the German government. We're doing that in Serbia, and we're looking at other opportunities to do the same thing in other places so that we can achieve security of supply, long-term stability for the assets that we invest in, but also ensure that the minerals that we're mining in those places with German technology, German funding, German political support come back into Europe in order to benefit German and European industry. So the model is evolving. The Chinese have had that model for a very long time, and that's what has made them so successful. But we need to involve that model with more European countries.
Thank you. This brings us to the last issue I want to tackle today, actually, is de-risking angle and the need for de-risking projects in and outside of Europe and closing the investment gap in Europe, given the competitive geopolitical context, especially with the US IRA and other factors like mineral price volatility and volatility in EV demand. In light of this, various analysts have stressed the importance of supporting and generating interesting business cases. Thomas, I believe you are best suited to take this one. What does an interesting business case look like, according to you, and beyond the patchwork of existing EU funding mechanisms, what, according to you, is needed to bridge the investment gap in Europe and to de-risk CRM projects and clean tech projects?
I think it goes beyond it goes beyond capital. It's a matter of you need speed, you need money, and you need coherence or consistency. The good thing with the private capital is that we are very pragmatic, so we can be quite efficient and quick in making decisions. The bad thing, we are very pragmatic, so we also can be very rude to some projects that are just trying to market their project forever, and that they won't have their project producing anyway, because some of these projects are facing inherent challenges that even with money and speed, you won't be able to tackle these. So that's the beauty of having private capital involved, not only subsidies and grants, and to the point that was made on taking risk, we are happy to take risk because that's the way you make return. If there is no risk, obviously you don't need the expertise to assess the risk and you don't make return. For me, raising private capital, I need to take some risks and I need to have the expertise to assess these risks. Probably going back to the coherence or consistency point, I think that's an important one because with the CRM Act now in place, we have good visibility and we have some funding instruments that are coming with it or alongside it. But consistency or the coherence is still something that is a bit messy sometimes, looking at it from the outside. Just for instance, the fact that mining is still not part of the European taxonomy, it's a bit weird for me to raise private capital. So some investors will say, I can invest money in your fund if you only do recycling of copper, but I won't be able to put money if you do mining of copper ores. But the aim is the same. So that's a bit weird. Similarly, you need consistency in the civil society. So that was mentioned before, but raising the awareness of that, the importance of the sector. We all have iPhones, but the young population, they don't have the connection in their mind with the mining industry. So there's been a lot of efforts made at the Commission, and the various movies on the European mining renaissance are quite interesting in that respect. But we need to push in that direction. Again, it's not coherent to have a lot of AI and a lot of data centers around that you push up in the north or the Nordics, and without having a clue of the amount it takes in terms of critical metals. Similarly, you need consistency as well in terms of the choices you make in allocating the subsidies. If you develop too many projects in parallel, and just taking the example of the gigafactories, in itself, it's a good idea to have a lot of gigafactories being developed at the same time with different technologies, different sponsors. But let's face it, look what happens at the moment. It's a bit difficult as well. And So you have to make choices in allocating the public funding while controlling as well the Asian technologies or Asian providers that are competing with the project that you are helping with your subsidies. So it's kind of a weird situation sometimes. And again, that's my take from coming from the private capital world. So that whole coherent approach then moving to the business case. There are a lot of good business cases in Europe. Yes, indeed. And the best one is an integrated project where you have the resources, you have the processing, you have the end users. I'm not too concerned on the offtakes themselves. I mean, the offtakes is a legal document. For me, it's more a question of partnership. And sometimes the paper of the document in itself can be just terminated, and we've seen that recently. So it's more a question of partnership and the traceability that, okay, you produce the metals that then are used by the end users. And the end user would be very proud to say that the metal is coming from that mine or that country. The minute you have a car, an EV in Brussels, with a big advertising on it saying that the graphite is coming from Sweden, and the nickel is coming from Finland, and the lithium is coming from Serbia, then the job is done. And that's traceability for me. And again, it's much more important than the offtake. The offtake, it's okay. That's good for the lawyers. I spend a lot of time looking at the competitiveness clause. But at the same time, if you take the example of the car manufacturers, they are a bit nervous to sign long-term take-or-pay on a specific chemistry and losing their agility in shifting technology. So we can have a separate debate on the offtake, but I'm a bit more in favor of traceability and partnership from the mine to the EV, for instance, rather than just a piece of paper. So to answer your question quite specifically, integrated project in Europe with European players, there are a lot of good business cases. I feel more into the battery raw materials value chain that is leading the way, but certainly and we heard it before, the amount of electricity that will be required to new capacity, to new transmission lines, and then I think after the EV industry, you have also all the energy industry that will probably develop their own good business case for our fund and hopefully for the other initiatives in Europe. But again, we need coherence, we need speed, and we need money.
Thank you. It's always tricky to stay in time, but I think we've got a bit less than 10 minutes left for some questions from the audience. Any questions for our esteemed panel? Yes. There's a microphone coming.
Thank you. It doesn't matter. I think you can hear me. Okay. I've got a very easy work to try and develop here under the current situation, not about mining, but about technologies such as batteries. I'm thinking of a large factory in Sicily, whereby we can buy cheaper technologies elsewhere. Shouldn't we confront ourselves with the idea of investing in technologies that are going to leap forward the next phase? I'm thinking of the dependency on China. And for the collaboration, there is a very good scheme in DG Growth, developed by DG Growth, Big Buyers is called, which is describing more or less what the gentleman from Rio Tinto was explaining, this partnership, developing together based on a baseline. I think that is maybe the way to do competition. And then it's not about maybe the pricing in terms of subsidies, but it doesn't sell because it is either not possible environmentally or because it costs too much, because it's energy or carbon intensive. And how are you going to use public procurement more? Because I know there has been a lot of attempts and some lack of clarity. Some of the states were not very happy with the usage of public procurement clauses with the Net Zero Act.
Thank you very much. First of all, on the partnership, I want to say that our strategic partnerships with third countries I mean, we tend to look at the geology first, I have to say that. But it's the same model, and there's a bit of a discussion as the Germans copied us, or anyhow. It's good to do it, all of them, but we go with the off-takers, with the finance. The EIB has now changed their policy. We bring the public banks in, we bring the development part in as well, and we bring in the technology as well for the mining. And as Mr. Šefčovič said, we have more than a dozen of these partnerships. Thanks to the development budget, which is not nothing in the EU Global Gateway, we can actually also build the road that sometimes is lacking to actually transport or ship the stuff in or out. So, and we work very much as Team Europe together. So that partnership. The partnerships on the public procurement, it doesn't work for everything, obviously. I mean, it works for solar panels because, you know, I'm a mayor, I have a school, I have a hospital. Of course, I have to put something on the roof. Then I will be interested. I have electric buses or public transport to organize. Today, public procurement rules in Europe have a bit of a bad reputation, which partially I can understand, because we have this kind of public procurement cathedral, which is 8 different legal texts. And then on top of it, we have by now 52 little chapels around it, where specific texts also have a bit on public procurement. How am I going to navigate that? So that's a big priority for the next mandate, and the European Council asked that also very much. We have 250,000 public bidders in Europe, and they're a bit confused. So we're focusing on the big ones, the big buyers, at least for the clean tech that they tend to buy, and to make them work together, to create scale, and to create also market perspective. You know, if 50 towns and cities in Europe say, we buy together electric buses, that means that's a market perspective for everyone building buses and building batteries for these buses and using raw materials to build batteries for these buses. We also have a regulatory deadline for urban buses, 2030, on the on the electrification. So the 35, sorry. This means we create the market perspective. And we give reassurance to the public buyers. When it comes to the non-price criteria, they are of course very nervous. They say, I need the thing to be done. If I go for the lowest price, which is normally not European products, then at least I'm sure there's no litigation cost. So if I do qualitative criteria, this gets more difficult. So we try to do guidance. We've developed standards for this. On the Net Zero Industry Act, we will come up for the resilience criteria with guidance. We already have for auctions this guidance. So we really help the buyers to use the means. But it's not 100% of the market. It's 14% of GDP, public buying, which is considerable. But it's when I look at the markets, clean tech and raw materials even less, then it's less relevant. But still, it has a signaling effect, and that's what we are trying to bring out very strongly.
I actually won the European Innovation Procurement Award with a French company, of which I'm a shareholder this year. École Polytechnique, and we have the project there.
Yeah, I mean, innovation procurement is possible, but I think it's only 3 or 4% of all procurement is innovation procurement. And 60% is for the lowest price. But that's what we are now trying to do, to frame the market, the perspective, to give that.
Any final question before we conclude? Gentleman there.
Work? Yes. Hi. Hi, Vincenzo Conforti with Glencore. First of all, I think Global Gateway and the strategic partnership is a great movement. It's a great step forward for the European Commission, for the European Union, and for the member states working together. So, well done. Please move forward. But my question is, and I refer to something that Thomas Lagré said, which I think is very true. Nobody wants to finance mining projects. If you look at the commercial banks in Europe, I could probably count them on the fingers of one hand, those who are really involved in financing new mines. And if you ask them to finance things in countries where mining has potential, Argentina, the DRC, Zambia, none of them are to be found. Maybe the only exception is the EBRD for their regions, which do not necessarily overlap. So my question is, I've heard noises about, can we have a EU guarantee helping these banks actually getting involved, leveraging that to increase funds. But ever since I heard that, which was in November, I haven't seen that moving forward. Is this something that could be done? Could we leverage EFSD Plus, maybe?
That's a good question, and just for the record, I'm coming from BNP Paribas, so I've been spending 17 years in the mining finance team that was shut down, and that's the reason why I joined that new initiative. So and to be honest, it's not a question of risk, it's a question of image and reputation. So even if you provide a guarantee, that won't change the analysis. For me, it goes back to the fact that you don't have mining as part of the taxonomy, or you have mining on the side. The value chain has to be comprehensive. I mean, if you're dealing with copper, then it goes from the mine to the recycle of the cables. If you're dealing with lithium, the same. You cannot just look at one part of the value chain. To your question specifically, yes, indeed, there are some French banks that are not supporting the industry. Again, it's not mining per se, it's more extractive industries as a whole. So we killed oil and gas. As a consequence, mining was killed at the same time because of the semantic. Now at the same time you have EIB. EIB 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were quite active in the mining space. I know they are looking at it again, trying to bring back the expertise. It's a question of expertise as well. I mean, looking at a greenfield mining operation and presenting it to a credit committee within a bank, good luck with that. It's a very comprehensive analysis. And at the same time, some of these mining finance transactions had very difficult situations recently, and the one in Brazil, for instance, and a lot of commercial banks lost money, and some of even the export credit agencies in Europe were a bit nervous on what's happening on these cost overrun delays. But again, if you have the expertise, you're able to put good capital at play, and you'll make a good return if you're teaming up with the partners. So
I'd like to add to that. That's true what you say about the past. But we're in a new situation now. And I think the public reputation of mining is also polished by the fact that we have a Critical Raw Materials Act in Europe. We did not have that. And we explained the story, like I did in the beginning. If you want clean energy, then you need clean tech. And if you want clean tech, you need raw materials. There is no way around this. And to be able to explain that, to be able to show it, the electrification of mines, I think is a great example also that the job in mines is no longer what you think it was. It's I've seen great examples of mines where everything's electrified, where the actual activity is via screens, and I think. In 3 years, we'll talk maybe about the FOMO effect, that the banks that are not yet doing it will have fear of missing out on this business. I was EIB in a previous life, EIB board member. We were very reticent. It's changing. It's changing. A number of public banks are also changing. Someone managed KfW already. So. They move in, and of course they move in with a public purpose, mandate on the de-risking part, in particular in third countries, but others will follow, and I see this movement. So I'm very confident that with the risk knowledge, and of course, if you don't do it, you don't know how to appreciate the risk. But as we build that knowledge up again, also through the initiatives where the member states invest, I think it will be a market, very clearly.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Thank you for this wonderful panel, for your interesting insights and participation today. Please give them a round of applause.
And now?